Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Climbing Sycamores podcast, where we look at today's topics to get a better view of Christianity. I'm Annie Beege, and I'm joined by my friends Ben Sadler and Matt Harbach.
You wanted to talk about Jelly Roll.
I do, you guys. So Jelly Roll, we were kind of talking beforehand. He's kind of like the Zach Williams of secular music right now. I don't know. He's got this song. I think it's
Didn't
called...
you say Post Malone and Zach Williams
like
had a baby?
Post Malone.
Fat Post Malone.
He's a fat Post Malone, the
saying.
tattooed face. But the Zach Williams like plight of like, I'm a screw up and here's my honest, And so he has a song out, Need a Favor, and the lyrics, I only talk to God when I need a favor. I only pray when I ain't got a prayer. So who the hell am I? Who the hell am I to expect a savior? Oh, if I only talk to God when I need a favor, but God, I need a favor. And so the thing I think is so interesting about this song is that I've heard it on 4 different radio stations in the last, month or so, and they've been very contrasting. So 1029, which is like a hard rock, and they're playing like, Pantera and like, some really heavy stuff. And then, 99.1 The Mix, which is like adult hits, and then pop station, and then country music station. So I think he is, a country music, like that's his wheelhouse or his origin story. But I just thought it was interesting that this song is like crossing musical lines and genres.
Musically, it seems like a country song to me. Like
yes,
if you
but
listen to it, just the sound, and you couldn't really hear the words.
It has some like Nickelback type.
Oh yeah,
so you can kind of see it there, and it's catchy.
Yep.
Like the melody's real catchy, and the concept I think is catchy. So you can see how it might be a little pop. So to me, it does cross kind of these genres, and I don't know. I just think it's really applicable, at least to me, because sometimes I feel that way. Like,
Yeah, you
hey
go
God,
to God.
I need something.
Help!
Oh, thanks, by the way. Yeah, and oh, my bad, by the way. Sorry for my wrongdoings, but I need something.
I was just talking to some friends like 2 days ago or something about how God is only wise when we don't get what we want. Mm-hmm. We're only like, a God in his infinite wisdom decided that I shouldn't get this thing. Mm-hmm. But when you get the thing, you're just like, boom, crushed it.
Yeah,
Look at me
I need
go.
this.
Mm-hmm.
I think the reason it's resonating with so many people is not just the sound or whatever, but that is a message that resonates with everyone.
Totally.
He's being honest. The difference between a hypocrite and everybody else is the hypocrite's not honest. And he's being honest, like radical honesty, that I talk to God when I need help, but I really need some help, God. So even though I've screwed up and he says I'm more Sundays I'm drunk than going to church. He's just being honest. And so Jesus tells this parable when people were looking down on everybody else, he says, and full of themselves and looking down on everybody else. A Pharisee went to the temple and said, God, I thank you that I'm not like other people. I'm not like that. I fast twice a week, not just once.
Ooh.
And I give 1/10 of all I get, even from my spice rack and everything. And I'm not like that tax collector over there. And the tax collector was like the worst person in society because they were colluding with the Roman government. And it says, then this tax collector in the corner didn't lift up his head to heaven, but beat his breast and said, have mercy on me, a sinner. And Jesus says, I tell you, that man went home justified, not the other. And so it's just, that's the message of Christianity. It's the person who's honest that's forgiven, not the person who thinks they're keeping all the rules outwardly. So
that's good. And that was my point, is like, this is really good. This guy, he's saying, I don't go to church. Like I'm drunk more often than I am in church, like on Sundays.
Yeah.
As opposed to somebody who is coming to church every week and they look like they have it all together. And,
which they don't.
And yes, I mean, we should be talking to God, about everything, about thanking him, praising him, apologizing, repenting, and also asking him for things. And so, it just, I mean, I can kind of relate to this myself a little bit, because I think it's just kind of natural, but I think, and maybe this is a bad inference and I'm putting words in God's mouth, but I think he would rather that than nothing at all. Like, you're still leaning on him, you're still depending on him, it's better than nothing.
That's what I mean. That's what Jesus said. He says that man went home justified. You know, somebody who's honest like this goes home justified than somebody who's faking it and just merely going through the motions or acting like they have it all together. They don't need God. Their religious performance keeps God at bay. But somebody who's hit rock bottom, and I think, didn't you say and I think I read this too, he served prison time.
He did, and I don't know what
whatever.
for. But.
Yeah, but like once you hit rock bottom and you have nothing to hide anymore, like, all right,
well,
my record's out there. This is what it is. Take it or leave it. You have a radical honesty. And I think that's kind of how the Apostle Paul was, you know, him being found out as a murderer. He just like, well, all right, here it is. This is who I am. And there can be some real honesty after that. You have to keep up.
Airs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I felt like a long time ago, Annie, you brought up like this thing people were talking. I don't know if people are still saying manifesting, but that was like,
oh yeah, it's still maybe not as much.
like a couple years ago. Everyone was manifesting this and that.
Yeah.
It was like during the virus, everywhere I would turn, you know, people kept saying unprecedented and like new normal, all this stuff, right? And everyone was just like worn out, stressed out, and like just completely stretched to their limits all the time.
Sure.
And then alcohol prices skyrocketed. Alcohol stocks skyrocketed because everyone just kept buying alcohol. My point is like I don't know, you know, how many people are believing in God, but I feel like people are getting more and more to that point where it's like
Something.
the consumerist paradise that you think you're living in is not enough. It's not helpful to you, and people are just sort of like they're whatever you want to call it, manifesting, but they're like crying out like, I just need some help. I can't do this. And I think that's the same sentiment. I think that's working.
That's
and
good.
I think eventually that will lead people back to God because, well, that's how he works. So
that's a really good point. Yeah, where people are manifesting, they're sitting and they're maybe meditating about a job that they want or a you know, significant other, and they're just, you know, quote, putting it into the universe, which is our form of praying. Really, we're putting it to God, you know, and who is the universe. And so it's like, you know, I don't know. I think that people are realizing like this is bigger than me.
Right.
This is out of my control.
Right.
And now it's just out of necessity. Like they just feel like they have literally no other choice.
Right.
But just like someone help me.
Right. And that's kind of where he's at, right? You hit this rock bottom and I can't rebuild my life on my own. I can't pull this off my own. I've screwed it all up. And that is my only hope that's left.
I need a favor.
Man. That's great.
But that actually transitions, I think, nicely into our big topic because, you know, I think rather than greeting a song like this with skepticism, like, oh, well, you're going to pray about it, people are like, heck, if it works. You know, like people are at their wits' end and then they're looking for something. So,
yeah. So well, thank you for bringing that up. Now the song's going to be in my head for the rest of the afternoon.
Catchy. See, that's why it's on the pop stations. Yep.
And I think we need more of that radical honesty, and it's going to keep resonating. You would never ask to screw up your whole life, but those people become prophets when they hit rock bottom and they have nothing left to lose and nothing left to hide and no facade to keep up. They can really speak some incredible truth, and that's the gospel. So the other topic I wanted to talk about, it, you know, a scientist I've been following for a while now, Stephen Meyer, he's kind of the face of intelligent design, and I think maybe it's probably 20 years ago when I first heard of Richard Dawkins and this new atheist. They're kind of like militant atheists they were almost more like comedians than scientists, where they kind of make fun of Christians. And I remember I was sitting in my office, my internship year, somehow watching, I don't know why I was doing this. I was watching a video of Richard Dawkins talking at Berkeley. And he's putting up these slides of, you know, I believe in God as much as I believe in the spaghetti monster, and the crowd's laughing, and then, you know, they believe that this God came down and twiddled everything, but Darwin showed us that we don't need God. Everything can happen all by random chance, and there is no designer. And so a lot of people with these kind of tweetable, sarcastic comments, it was enough for them to kind of discredit all of Christianity. But Stephen Meyer, he's been making this rigorous case for intelligent design. And then just recently, he was on the Joe Rogan podcast, which I think is the largest podcast in the world, or up there. It's one of them.
Let me Google it.
Let's Google that. But what I like, I don't listen to a ton of Rogan every once in a while, but for the most part, Rogan is a pretty good interviewer. He'll let people talk. He'll challenge them. He wants to get to the bottom of things, and he seems to be pretty unbiased. And he just let this guy talk. And so Stephen Meyer has like 3 big points that he says. Dawkins would say, you look at the world and it's exactly what you would expect if it came from pitiless indifference.
Which is hopeless.
Yeah, hopeless. No point,
right?
no purpose.
Point, no purpose.
No
it's
nothing.
Terrible. It's so sad.
Quick interjection.
Yeah.
So in 2021, Joe Rogan was the top podcast. I think he still is, but
Okay.
obviously you can't just
So
keep him.
very high. Yeah, very.
He's at least in the top 5, but he has been at least the
Okay,
very
so
top.
big name. And I was just surprised that this Christian who's a scientist is able to have this kind of forum to tell his story. So he's written 3 pretty, I think, monumental books called, the first one was Signature in the Cell, second one was Darwin's Doubt, and the third one, The Return of the God Hypothesis. So he's getting even more clear as to what he thinks is the intelligence behind creation. And so he is really responding to Richard Dawkins. And in the beginning of his book, his latest book, The Return of the God Hypothesis, he quotes Richard Dawkins, who says, "The universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is, at bottom, no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference." So that's kind of the whimsical way that Richard Dawkins talks.
Whimsical. That's awful.
It is scary and awful, but with his kind of brash confidence or whatever, and that's how he and so he sets out to respond to that, saying, no, it's actually the opposite. And there are 3 big things that he's been talking about in all of his books but now he's getting even clearer. First of all is Big Bang cosmology, or whatever you would say, the idea that from observable science in every way you could look at it, the universe, however you want to date this, has a beginning. It's expanding. And that was surprising. Albert Einstein based his whole theory on eternal matter and eternal cosmology, and not that it had a beginning. When he realized, after he looked through the Hubble telescope, that our universe had a beginning, that it was expanding, it threw him all off. Like, he knew immediately that meant there had to be a beginner. He knew immediately that there had to be a cause, a grand person behind it who caused it to start. Same thing with Stephen Hawking. He really developed this idea that the universe had a beginning, then spent the rest of his career trying to disprove what he found scientifically. And so that's the first thing, that the universe has a beginning, so it has to have a beginner. The second thing that Stephen Meyer talks about is incredible fine-tuning of the universe. So all the laws of physics and nature and everything, it's so bizarre, so astronomically precise. It's like these 1,000 dials that are all perfectly dialed for life. And if anything was just off, if gravity was off one little dial, if one law of physics was off just one little dial, everything would come crushing down. All the things that make up life wouldn't be able to work. And then the third thing, which I think is one of the most powerful arguments, is now we know that DNA works like a digital code. That the proteins on the DNA double helix are sticking to there to tell instructions, and they fold just perfectly to give instructions to the cell as to how the cell is supposed to reproduce and what the function it's supposed to have. So it's like digital instructions that you would put into your computer to perform a function. That's what DNA. That's how these amino acids work.
Which is why no two people are the same.
Yeah.
Why no 2 animals are the same, even within the species. Right? I mean.
Yeah, and how every cell carries out its function. How every cell multiplies to do a certain task. Like it's very much like computer code. And Bill Gates said it's like computer code, except it's more complicated and comprehensive than anything that we've ever developed. Because most computer code is just ones and zeros. Yep. This is a four character computer code or digital code. And so then he makes these beautiful kind of illustrations that I remember driving out west to Mount Rushmore, and you see these beautiful mountains. They're wonderful, beautiful, but then you come up over the corner and then you see the faces, and that is distinct. You can tell that like the mountains have this beauty to them and this organization to them and these structure to them. But then you look at the faces and you realize those were chiseled. A mind was behind there making the faces to look like these four presidents. And that's the kind of world we live in. We live in a world that has fingerprints of design, of somebody chiseling things out to make things a certain way for a certain purpose. And so he just makes these kinds of incredible arguments. Another one, he uses something like this as an illustration to help people like me who don't understand all the science understand. Like if you're walking down the beach and you see waves in the sand, even though it's beautiful and organized and structured or whatever, you could explain that by saying, oh, no one necessarily had to make those waves in the sand. It probably was the wind that came by and the wind naturally did it. There was no intentional process behind it. But if you're walking down the beach and you saw three letters like I, heart, Emily or something, you would recognize that there's no way a message could come by random chance. And inside of every one of our cells is a message. And 100% of the time, a message comes from a mind. Notes on a sheet for music. Could ink spill onto a sheet of paper and make up some notes? Maybe, I don't know, but they wouldn't be organized. They wouldn't be in key. They wouldn't, those kind of things. Whenever you see even a couple notes, well, that's how the building blocks of life have that kind of digital information. And so he points all these things back to there's a beginner, there's a designer, there's an author. And so I just think it's a really compelling argument, and it's leading many scientists to reinvestigate the God hypothesis because when we discovered the Rosetta Stone, another illustration he uses, and we saw all this chicken scratch, you could, again, think it was erosion, but then once you realized it was a language, now the best explanation is a mind, and that's kind of the world we live in. So I think that gives, I hope some of the people who dismissed Christianity or theism or whatever at first because they maybe heard these kind of big names, Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins, kind of dismiss Christianity. I hope they reinvestigate, because a lot of young people, I think, are listening to Rogan, and I hope they re-engage with this discussion. So it's really been helpful, and it's still a long way from believing in Christianity, these scientific findings. But for me, what it does is it shows that our faith is not completely irrational. Right. We're not just like believing things against some very raw, hard data. The raw, hard data is not oppositional to a creator, a designer. So.
Who has the burden of proof?
That's what I think. Exactly.
Like who in this situation has the burden of proof?
And so to respond to all these things, now you have complete lunacy and science fiction. So the answer to this is, well, maybe we live in a multiverse. And so now that's why Marvel picks up on the multiverse and all that. That comes from some of these scientists who want to hold on to mere materialism. And Stephen Meyer responds to the multiverse like, okay, so there's a multiverse that still doesn't so where did the maker of the multiverse come from? It's still it just takes
transfers
it just takes it back one. And there's some other, weird kind of sci-fi, bizarre, the irrational people now. It used to be that they used to think that Christians or believers or whatever, the irrational people believing things on blind faith. But now some of these theories that are coming out are completely irrational. They don't make any there's no evidence for them. There's no evidence for multiverse. There's no evidence for any of these things, but they're bringing up these different hypotheses because they're grasping anything but a mind behind it.
I'm happy they're thinking about it, though,
Right. Yeah.
because that is a step in the right direction.
Right.
Instead of saying, I don't care.
Right.
I don't care about life. I don't care about where it comes from, where it's going, why we're here, purpose.
Right.
So I am more, I'm happier to engage with people who are thinking about this, even if
Right.
it's contrary to what I
Right.
think.
And I think that's one of the best things. I think that's why I think Stephen Meyer is also a great example, because he's the least oppositional person that I've ever seen in these debates. He doesn't get angry. He welcomes the debate. He's happy that there are other people on other sides that think about this, and he doesn't see them as his enemies. So I think he also gives a good example as to how to do it. Yeah.
I think the answer to Annie's question is that I think Christians have the burden of proof.
You think so?
Yeah,
Tell me why.
because our claim is specific, and if you're truly an evolutionary scientist, you're just putting forth a hypothesis, and you're okay having lots of unanswered questions. Like if you are the true science, I don't think there's many people like this, but if you have the truly scientific mindset, then you're very okay having a lot of unanswered questions. That's your whole life is looking for answers.
But I don't think. Yeah, I disagree too. Why do you disagree? You first.
I just think I think people who are in that realm, and particularly when it comes to religion and faith and things like that, like they want concrete answers. They feel like they have the concrete answers.
Yes, I think a lot of people do, but I think that those people are wrong. I think that their own worldview kind of implodes on them. Like if you call yourself a scientist, your goal is to find answers, but you would never think that you actually had them, because if you had the answers, stop researching.
Okay, well then they do think they have the answers regarding Christianity and the
Yes, I think those people are I think they haven't really thought long and hard about their actual stance on things. I think those people are kind of hypocrites.
I do think science is changing, and we're learning new things. I think you do have to kind of land sometime on some things, or else you can't do anything.
Yes.
But I do think there are some who are holding to an illogical belief in Darwinian evolution, when now we know about DNA, you need more genetic information to go from a sea creature to a land creature. There's no way to do that. What Darwin proved in The Origin of the Species was not The Origin of the Species, his landmark book. Mm-hmm. He proved through the Darwinian finches, of the adaptation of the species.
Yes.
And we adapt to our surroundings.
100%.
Finches don't turn into fish. They don't have the genetic makeup for it. They don't have the DNA for it. They don't have the digital code. And so many people, I think, in the scientific world are now giving up on some of these things. And those who are still hold on to it with almost a religious zeal without any proof anymore.
When was The Origin of Species written? Roughly.
1800s.
Okay. So the use of DNA in crime and criminology wasn't really until like 1986.
Right. The finding was 1970s or 1950s, I think, was when and it took a couple decades to really understand what it was.
Well, right.
But yeah, it's more recent.
My point is that it's so recent. Like, I mean,
Right.
1986 really isn't terribly long ago in the grand
Right.
scheme of things. So how much have we learned since then?
Exactly.
Even,
And Darwin said too, so he proposed this tree of life that, that something would start as a simple cell organism of some sort and then would become more complex. And so you would have like some prehistoric ooze would get more complex and it would turn into something more solid, and then it would evolve into something more complex and more complex. And he said, if my theory is true, you'll be able to see this in the fossil record.
right.
Well, the fossil record doesn't show these missing links. They don't show these transitional species. And now what we know about DNA is that you can't make something simple become more complex. Just like if I want my Windows 98 to work in Windows 2000, I need a complete upload of new information. And you need something from Windows to send to me to upload information. There's nothing internally that will make it more complex. And so a simple cell organism can't make itself more complex because it doesn't have the genetic code inside of it to write something. It has to start right away from a creator to be complex. And the only thing that a thing can actually do is get more simple.
I know this isn't enough, but like it just doesn't feel like that just doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I know that's not enough to say. Like, you know, that would be considered dumb and, you know, like just, you know, but like it just doesn't make sense
right
to me that it could go from.
Well, I guess to take it back, I still think the burden of proof is on Christianity because, again, I think at least in theory, again, not many people do this, but I think in theory, science is the blank slate. Like, if you're a materialist scientist, you think that all the knowledge and everything you can start at zero and you can just look around you purely through observation, the scientific method, and build up all your theories from that.
The interesting thing is the scientific method was developed by Christians, and some of the original scientists who give us science, Isaac Newton and many of them were Christians, and the reason they wanted to investigate the world is because they believed it was designed and observable and we could learn about how God made things. It was only more recently where the science equaled materialism or naturalism, or whatever you want to say, that everything had to have this blind materialistic cause, but that's not necessary. You were talking about using DNA in forensics or in crime scenes or whatever, you know, that's science. Mm-hmm. And you're trying to find out the human cause behind this murder. Mm-hmm. And when you're doing science and you see markers that point back to a mind, that point back to an author, it's not anti-scientific to make an inference that there is a divine being behind this. To exclude divinity or any kind of God would be like going into a crime scene and excluding a killer or a human cause behind this murder. Oh, it had to be died of natural causes. Well, sometimes people don't die of natural causes. Mm-hmm. Sometimes there is a person who kills them. And to say science has to be materialism and has to be blind chance and there can't be a cause behind it is the same thing. You know, some things are random. I mean, however you understand God's providence, but like, you know, the rock that falls down the river and erodes, and, you know, things that just happen because of the wind cycles and, you know, no human or influence. But then there are some things like the building of an engine, that engine didn't just all come together. It was designed. Well, inside of us, there's engines in all the same parts that you see in an engine are found inside of a cell, a rotor, gears, all these kinds of things. So I think that when we see that kind of intentionality and that kind of design, it's okay. It's still science. Or if you don't want to if you think science has to be called materialism, then you can call it something else. But it still points back to a mind behind it, I think. So I don't disagree with what you said. I don't think you can convince anybody of that, though, because, I mean, just think about the way you're taught the scientific method in school, like the age-old stinking bean sprouts that every seventh grader does for the science fair. It's like, I'm going to plant beans, right? And they come up with a question and they put it in different pots of soil, and then it turns out that they grow well in dirt but not in sand. Whatever it is, right? Sure. Whenever you're doing experiments, all of the factors contained in the experiment are observable by you. It's small scale stuff. I think ultimately a lot of people who say that they've chosen science over God still believe very much by faith
whatever their set of tenets is. But you know, it's like anything that we're actually using the scientific method on that is repeatable, it's observable, then you never need God for that.
Well,
for
I don't
that
know if that's
scientific
true.
process.
No, well, so
Well,
like
what?
So if I am walking through South America for the first time, and there's rocks and there's rocks and there's rocks, and then all of a sudden I see this temple in the middle of the forest. If I have this idea that I only explain things through natural causes, but I find a temple in the middle of the rainforest.
Yeah,
and,
well, humans are part of nature, though.
But it's still a cause, it's still a mind behind it.
Yeah.
So I would say, what is the truth? That's all I want to know. Who did this, and how did it get here, and what's its function? And I think the more you dive into studying things, the more studying our natural world, the more you'll see that there is intention and purpose behind it, which points just like, again, you find hieroglyphics on an inside of a cave. You're going to make the inference that that somebody did that there was a person behind it.
Right, but make that into a scientific process. So you find hieroglyphics in a cave. You say, okay, I find hieroglyphics in a cave. Question, how did they get there? Theory, humans wrote them.
Right. And so when I see the same kind of language on the inside of a cell, DNA, and I see code and language that are same inference, someone did that.
Yes. I think when you get down to, well, okay, my theory is this. I think that no matter how small you go or how large you go, you'll never find the end. That's my own personal theory.
The end of what? What do you mean?
Like, so we say like cells are made up of, well, they've got all kinds of components,
Sure.
right? They're made up of this, and those are made up of DNA, and the DNA are made up of proteins.
Sure.
What are the proteins made of? Amino acids or something? Is that right? I don't even know.
Sounds right.
Sure. And they're made up of ACTG, right?
Right.
Is your whatever it is, right? I think that what are those made of? I think you just keep going. I don't think we'll ever find the
Smaller,
end.
Well-
smaller, smaller, yeah.
But how they're linked in an order to tell a message
Yeah.
on the double helix, that points to, that's not just random processes to put the again, back to the idea of like ink falling onto a sheet is not going to, a natural process of the wind coming through, knocking over the ink onto a sheet of paper is not going to put together any kind of musical notes in any kind of order. But when we see not just order, but a message and instructions, that's when you make an inference that there's a mind, there's intention, there's a person behind it. And we talk about a personal God. So I think that's why, whatever you want to call it, science, if you want to call it by a different name, if you think science has to be materialism, investigating the truth. If there's a weapon at the murder, there's probably somebody did that. They just didn't have a natural heart attack or whatever, natural causes. If there was poison there, that would lead an inference. And so we make these same kind of inferences. And then when we find at the bottom all these kinds of inferences that lead to, that point us back to a person, we can make that same kind of connection. So it is repeatable. Because in every other part of our experience, when we see language, when we see cause, when we see a beginning, there's a mind behind it. So I think that's clear for me, at least.
Sure. Well, I think the bigger issue is that, like, evolution. Again, this is the problem with the whole thing, is that materialistic science claims to start from a blank slate. I mean, that's like the natural conclusion of that line of thinking, is
Sure.
that we only believe what we can prove empirically, and the only things we can prove empirically are what we can observe and repeat.
Right.
Which is kind of funny, because you will never find any final answers with that system because it'll always cast doubt
There's
and
always
lead
change.
to more questions.
Right.
But since we've instituted it in schools, we have not changed it, or we haven't changed it. Like we haven't allowed for any other, like public schools. That's what they teach,
Yeah.
and they treat it like it's a fact.
Yeah.
But it's not, and and I don't think it can be by its own logic.
And I mean, I'm not a scientist, so I'm sure if there was a secular scientist here, he would challenge me more than I'm able to handle. But for me, it's been very helpful because I guess a couple decades ago when I, started reading things like, what is The God Delusion and some of these books that Dawkins wrote, and, even reading Origin of the Species, you start to wonder like, all right, am I all wrong on this? Do I have like a totally illogical faith? And to now see that the more we've gone into science, the more it does point, or what do you want to call it? The more we investigate our natural world, it doesn't seem to just run on natural processes. It doesn't seem to run on mere materialism and chance. There's too much intentionality. There's too much language. There's too much things that inference back to a causal mind, a great cause. And then that's still a long ways from Christianity, but it's not anti-Christian. It's just, now, obviously, if you're secular, and we're both trying to study our natural world, a secular person and a Christian can do great work side by side as they continue to try to investigate how the world works, and you can have a different conclusion. I mean, I think about how important science is. When we lived by the Mississippi River, there used to be no American eagles because they didn't realize that the mosquito spray that they're spraying on everything was getting into the water. Birds were eating the fish, and their eggshells were getting so brittle that all the eagles died. Well, scientists investigated that, and they said, we got to take out this mosquito spray, and all of a sudden all the eagles came back. So we can do great natural observable science and those kinds of things. I just think these existential questions like, why am I here? If you believe at bottom the world is all chance and there is this blind, pitiless indifference, you will think your life has no purpose.
Yep.
But if you believe at the heart of it, it was an intention, a designer, a creator, you will believe that your life has intention, design, and you should use it
you're
for
special.
create. Yeah, you're special. All those things.
Unique. Yeah.
And so I think most people live on that worldview. I don't know anybody who can logically handle living on this worldview of blind, pitiless indifference.
I think there's whichever way you go, there has to be faith involved.
But I think not only psychologically, it's more satisfying to say I'm designed, I have a purpose. Like that's psychological satisfying. But I don't want to just be psychologically satisfied. I don't want just to believe this because it makes me happier. Like then if it's not true, don't believe it. Let's live pitiless existence, right? But if not only, this is psychologically satisfying, it's also true. Like at the bottom is a design, is purpose, which means I have purpose and everything has purpose, and all parts of creation have purpose. So I think it goes together, and that it's coherent, and I don't have to shut off one part of my brain. I thought for a while that as a Christian, I can believe in Christianity and shut off that, and science or whatever observable truth is in a whole different category,
No.
and they don't go together. Now I think there are many people who are doing science and they're seeing so many clear pointers that points back to a creator, and they have to shut off their theological and spiritual part of their brain because it's too clear for them. I think that's what Albert Einstein realized, like, oh crap, if the world has a beginning, the universe has a beginning, there's a beginner, and he couldn't handle that. It was just too much. It was, he knew, he could see that direct connection. So it's both. You can they work together actually. Yeah. So that's what I'd say. I'm a little passionate on this. I think it's important.
Yeah, it's good.
I think eventually all truth has to fall in line. You
Right.
can't have two opposing things be true. So I think eventually the people are going to keep researching, let's say, the origin of the universe and origin of life or whatever. And it's all just going to sort of fall in line with what the Bible already teaches. Because someone's got to be, in the end, someone's got to be right.
There
Someone's
was
gotta
a
be
real
wrong.
beginning.
You know,
Yeah.
like,
Right.
you can't have it both ways. And I think for a long time, the scientists thought that Christianity had to be subservient to their view, and I think it's going to be the opposite.
I was fascinated by listening to the Rogan podcast because Rogan is not a Christian, but he was eating it up. And this was like, he couldn't believe how rigorous I think Stephen Meyer's arguments were. Then he, of course, had to kind of do a tangent on like psychedelic mushrooms or something like that. You know, like, why do we have to go there? Is that really where this conversation? And so, but I also, what I appreciate about the Rogan interview is he kept on pressing him. All right, you're talking about intelligent design. Who do you think that is? And Stephen Meyer finally said, I think it's Christianity. I think it's Jesus. And he said, because the same scientific rigor that I use in the natural world, I use with the Bible. And so he's looked at things like Old Testament documents, the Bible talking about the Assyrian invasion. And then we look at historical records from the Assyrians, and we find that they talk about an invasion into Judah at the exact same time in the exact same way. And he talks about how all of the account of Jesus' death, like, so we have so many outside evidence of the historical characters. Caiaphas, the high priest at the time, we just found his ossuary, the bone box of Caiaphas. You know, we found coins with Pilate's name on it. We found all these historical markers that are in line with Scripture, and so he takes that same kind of scientific rigor to the Bible, and that stands up as well. So I just found that to be really helpful and fascinating. And I love to listen that Rogan and all of his people that kind of follow Rogan, I pray that this would open up people to Christianity again.
Like, we're not a bunch of idiots.
Right.
Like, hello, you know, like, because it's always been that way. You know, you maybe
Right.
sometimes made to feel like you're dumb because you have faith, or you, you know, there isn't enough evidence to support it, and you get challenged and whatnot. And it isn't that.
Right.
So
Right.
I think if people would just take the time to, and I commend Joe Rogan. I didn't listen because I skimmed over it because that's what I do. But I did notice that he stopped and listened.
Right.
He didn't try to, you know, cut Meyer off. He let him talk and was engaged in the conversation. And I thought that was great. And I think we ought to do more of that. Everyone.
I think that's why he's one of the top podcasts, because he just lets people talk, and he's honest about what he believes or what he thinks, and he challenges people, but he also gives them room to state their case. And he has people of all different backgrounds, and there's just no other place that I know of that's doing that. Everybody's got this agenda. I really think people like Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson, they keep going down these roads. They're going to, whether they say it publicly or not, going to come onto the truth, and I think that truth is going to set them free. Yeah. That's all I have to say about that.
Well, I think an important takeaway from this is not that you can or should try to argue people into your beliefs, but it's more to just give you a little strength in that position that you hold, because it's not completely illogical.
I agree. I think that's true. I do think it also gives you strength, but it does give you a foot at the door, like, or gives you kind of a path to have a deeper conversation. Because if somebody dismisses Christianity at the outset because they think it's irrational or unscientific, you can at least say, okay, well, consider this, and then let's at least acknowledge that it's not irrational, it's not unscientific, and then we can have a deeper conversation about what really matters.
Yeah. And remember, a lot of people don't disbelieve because the science. I think very few people are even on that train. I think it's personal issues. I think it's anger. I think it's pride, whatever.
Yeah, I agree. And then and then you find a scientific or some other
Yes.
proof to kind
Yeah.
of validate
Yes.
your anger about
Yes.
something. Yeah,
Absolutely.
I agree. Really good. Well, that was fun.
All right. Thanks for listening, people. If you like the content, leave a comment, like, share, send to a friend who is maybe thinking about these sorts of things. We would really appreciate it.
You're such a good marketer.
It's what I do. Working at church, marketing for Jesus.
If you'd like to get a hold of us here at the Climbing Sycamores podcast, feel free to email bsadler@victoryofthelamb.com. bsadler@victoryofthelamb.com. If you like today's intro music, it's been brought to you by Andrew Lynch's song, My Name. Hello.